Press row, opening day. Into the first inning. No runs, no hits, no errors, and no fans. Hi, this is Will O'Toole, welcoming you to another edition of Sports History. I want to thank you again for allowing me to come into your homes and spout everything baseball, everything sports, everything fun in our world today. And I do sometimes digress and go off on little tangents, but that's because there's just so much that sports really does make me think about. Not just about the game itself and the fun that we have as kids playing it, as adults even playing it, but as fans watching it, observing it, writing about it, talking about it, debating it. You know, sports is such a great hobby. It's such a great passion. That's why we have fanatics or fans. And there is so much history that you can learn through sports, geography, history, culture, language, etc. So I'd like to devote this show to a little bit about opening day, to our friends to the north, talk a little bit about the Toronto Blue Jays and the old Montreal Expos, talk about the new rules that are being employed in the 60-game schedule of Rob Manfred's Baseball 2020. Let me just see if I can find an old picture of Rob. Yeah, there he is. There's Rob Manfred. To be fair, he's in a tenuous spot. I know that baseball really probably did want to start the season sooner. Didn't get the okay. I know that the players have stated they would like to have played a few more games than 60, perhaps 70 or 80. I certainly don't like the rules that he's pushing during this truncated season, and we'll get into that in a second. But I also want to give some shout-outs to our the old franchise, the Montreal Expos, who are now currently the defending world champions, except that they're in our nation's capital, the Washington Nationals, and the Toronto Blue Jays, who have been playing baseball north of us since 1977. We'll talk a little history of both franchises. But I know this. I went crazy a little bit in our last show, and I forgot to mention I found an article that really helped support my idea about being anti-DH, and I wish that the game would return to its traditional rules and get rid of the designated hitter. I even offered some alternatives, and that is adding three players in lieu of having a DH. The owners would be happy because they wouldn't be paying X amount of dollars to an aging, fading star who only does one thing. And that's hit the ball, which is very important. But it would offer 3 new members to the Players Association. The owners, of course, would benefit because they would come on the cheap, as opposed to, let's say, paying millions and millions of dollars, like I said, for an aging star. That would be, but this article that I found and I forgot, and now, of course, I couldn't locate it again. So in the next show, I'll tell you who the author is and where you can find the site. But basically, the author makes 3 really good points, and that is this. Has the DH really increased the offense? Because that was the reason why it was employed by the American League in 1973. And, of course, all you Yankee fans I know that it was Ron Blomberg who was the first designated hitter in baseball history. And, of course, he played for the Pinstripers way back when. But this article, and of course the statistical analysis that the author does, shows that the reality of the DH is that it doesn't offer or really provide more offense as everyone kind of thinks it does. In fact, the author says that only 1 run every 4 games is actually added to the total of a team. That's only 40 runs a game. Now, yes, to a certain extent, that's a lot, but just think about it. Every 4 games, that's 0.25 per game. that you're scoring in terms of runs. Really isn't a lot. Secondly, the author offers this. If the DH was such a boon to the game and such a benefit, why aren't the teams, particularly in the American League, why aren't they going out and just developing a designated hitter? And the reason is because they think that you can just plug an aging vet in that spot and he will be successful, or you can give a guy off and just have him, basically what he's doing is pinch hitting 4 times a game. It's really not the psychology of it. It really is a little bit more than that. I know that probably the most successful DH that I knew of, who was not a slugger, of course, was Hal McRae, who really saw his career take off by only playing one side of the ball. He wasn't the greatest defensive player when the Reds had him. In fact, the Reds traded him for pitching. Remember, I told you that he was traded for Roger Nelson and Richie Scheinblum. But when he went to the Royals, actually the Royals were really revolutionary. They really just said, we're inserting you as our DH. This is going to be your role. That's all you're going to do. And of course, McRae, I think he give them a batting average from 280 to 300 for the next 5, 6, 8 years. Probably provide him about 10, 11 home runs. He had some gap power, obviously, so he hit tons of doubles in Royal Kauffman Stadium. But he was really the first and only DH that I can think of that was, all right, just kind of molded for that position. All the rest that you think about, they were just big thumpers late in their career. Insert them there. Maybe we get a couple of home runs, big spots, and win a couple of games. I'm talking, as I said last week, Orlando Cepeda, Henry Aaron, to a certain extent, Dick Allen. All right. I'm thinking Lee May, Baltimore. All right. So, Tommy Davis. Tommy Davis was a weird player in terms of he was big, built like a home run kind of guy, but he was more of a line drive hitter. Very effective. Got hurt. Really, the injury to his ankle really hurt his career immeasurably. But he still was an effective hitter, albeit he was one-dimensional. Really was just a DH, and that was it for the rest of his career. And even before then was never really known for his fielding prowess. Anyway, third thing that the author really says is this. Well, if you have a DH, where does it end? And he really makes a compelling argument because there are certain rules in girls softball that I know where you actually have a designated defensive player. So his whole point is, when are we just going to have 8 men or 9 men line up and just be your offensive players, and then 9 men to be, or 8 men plus the pitcher, be your defensive stalwarts? Think Mark Belanger, unless he's hitting against Nolan Ryan. But think, if you could outfit your whole team with that kind of defensive specialist, a Mark Belanger at short and second, and then get a thumper on the other side. I mean, really? Do we want baseball to become specialized like football has become? And that's what I was worried about, or that's why I'm so against this, because Willie Mays, yes, I know, they are immortal players. They come around once in a generation. Think Mike Trout now. But to see Willie Mays and say, this is the kind of player I want to be. If you were growing up, nobody ascends to say, I just want to be a DH when I grow up. Nobody does that. Nobody says, hey, listen, I just want to be a 6th, 7th, or 8th reliever and maybe a spot starter. Everybody wants to be the ace of a staff. Maybe some people now want to be like the next Mariano. I can understand that. But most people want to be that 5-tool player. Hit with power, field, run, and throw. And as I said, Willie Mays embodied that. Can you imagine if imagine if you're the manager, determine what side of the ball is he going to be playing. Do you want him on offense or do you want him on defense? Me, I'll take him on both sides. But that's where this author was saying we could lead, the game could lead to too much specialization. Now, as far as the new baseball rules that are coming out, 60 games. If you go to extra innings, you're going to be putting a runner at second base. The runner at second base, it's going to be charged as a team. No, it's going to be charged as an error. I don't know whether it's going to be indiscriminate, or if the scorekeeper for that game is going to say, hey, you know what? I had it on the right fielder last game. I'll just move it over to the center fielder, or I'll give it to the catcher. That walk or that player who's going to be on the base, it's going to be an unearned run if it scores. And the crazy thing is, does that add to the pitcher's whip? That's another. That is another elaborate, redundant stat that's big with the metrics today. But that any kid who would turn around an old baseball card from the 60s or 70s would realize, if you got a pitcher who throws 100 innings in a year and he allowed 100 hits and 50 walks, you knew as a schoolboy that, man, that guy was always pitching out of trouble. And that you realize this, if you saw Sandy Koufax's stats and you saw a guy like him throw 300 innings, or even on the average, let's just say it was 250 innings, and he allowed 100 hits and 50 walks, you knew that Koufax was not allowing too many guys on base. So the whip, it's just kind of, I just think sometimes that the metrics guys, it's like the batting average, and they add the slugging percentage to the batting average to give you the offensive percentage. Taken separately, I think it's more defines what a player does. If a guy has a 330 batting average and his slugging percentage is only 400, well, then you know he's basically a singles hitter. But if you know a guy is a 250 hitter, but his slugging percentage is 500, kind of like a Mike Schmidt, then you know the guy is getting, for most of his hits, a ton of them, a majority of them are probably going for extra bases. By adding the two together, the batting average and the slugging, you really, I think you're adding to confusion, especially to people who are just coming into the game. That's another thing. So anyway, what they're adding with these 60 games, putting a runner at second. And here's the crazy thing. Suppose that, all right, so runner at second, as my brother, listen, I talk baseball to my two brothers. We have a lot of fun. We take, I guess, we take the game seriously. I think we take the debate and the discussion even more seriously. Do you think this guy really belongs on the Hall of Fame? Is this guy a Hall of Famer? That sort of, it's fun. Can share some beers or a cup of coffee, or even back and forth with the emails in this pandemic. It's a ton of fun, and I'm lucky to have it because they've taught me so much. But really, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a runner at second. Now you get the intentional walk. Now you might get the sacrifice bunt. So now you have runner second and third, one out. Manager's probably going to walk intentionally another batter. So now you have the bases loaded, one out. And now you're going to rely on the strikeout or double play. Now, it may not work that way all the time, but you can see the wheels turning with the managers, especially when, you're not, especially depending on who's in the lineup. Do you really think Mike Trout, think about it. Do you really think Mike Trout is going to have nobody out, a runner at second, and he's going to be allowed to hit? Or do you think the smart thing probably will be to walk Trout and set up force plays? It's one thing that the athletics with the money ball aspect have really shown, and that is just pick up the out. It's nothing new. It's something that Earl Weaver, when he was managing, was always saying, pick up the out. The out is more important. The out is more important. The out, except for if that run that scores is the winning run. All right? But this is what's going to happen. You are not going to let Mike Trout beat you. You're just going to walk him. So, and here's the thing. Now you go, let's say 10th, 11th, and 12th inning, and nobody can score. Is Rob Manfred over the next 10 games saying, hey, look, we've looked at this. Here's what we're going to do. If the game goes to the 13th inning, we're going to put runners on first and second. Or if the game goes to the 18th inning, we're going to load the bases. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Just play the game in the way it is. Now, radical as I am with this, and I know this goes against tradition and stuff, but I'd even do this. And I know that some minor leagues have adopted, so it's really nothing new. Play more games, maybe an extra 10 games. The heck with that runner at second stuff. And if play a doubleheader with only 7 innings, 2 7-inning doubleheaders. But if you allowed what I also had said in our last show, to expand the rosters, just have 30 guys on the roster. What's the big deal? It's an extra 5-6 guys. And really see what managers do. And why I would do this is because the big fear, starting up like they are, of course, the big fear is always particularly the pitching, and in particular the starting pitching, and the fact that the guy is one pitch away from maybe a career-ending, an injury that's career-ending. Just experiment that way. Because like I said, you don't start and finish with the same 25 guys in all 162 games. People get hurt. People are sent down. People are brought up. People are traded. People are waived. People are signed on as free agents. People are released to become free agents. So those same 25 guys, just take a look. Take a look at the 69 Mets. See who they started with. And then see who they finished with. Any team, for the most part. Take a look at any of the Yankee teams in the 70s and even the old Yankees when they were just robbing players from the Kansas City A's. See if they ever began with the same group of guys in April that they finished with in the pennant or the World Series. Anyway, digressing again, and I'd like to devote a little bit more time to our neighbors to the north. I know as we go on, I've been asked to do something about the 71 World Series. I will. I'd also like to do something, a tribute to Willard Mullen, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sports cartoonists. He gave us the original Brooklyn Dodger bum, and a wonderful cartoonist. In fact, I wish I just had he has more talent in the clipped pinky nail than I do in my entire body. So I really look up to these legendary cartoonists, him and Gallo and others. Bruce Stark, great caricature artist, unbelievable. Anyway, I'd like to give a tribute to the Toronto Blue Jays and the Montreal Expos. Here's the old Expo one. I think everyone has seen that logo. Of course, it's red, white, and blue. The Expos, I always thought it was kind of cool and kind of weird at the same time, if you know what I mean, that they were named after basically the World's Fair of 1967, Expo 67. But, okay. What I could never understand until my brother illuminated me on this was that I look at this logo, I could never figure out how that spelled Expo or how that meant Expo. Shouldn't there be an X in there? Shouldn't there be a P? Was it upside down, etc.? And then my brother told me, no, those are the letters of the original owner, Charles Bronfman. And those 3 letters together make the M for Montreal. Kind of a stylistic M from the 1960s. That was the calligraphy or the graphics art from the 60s, kind of matched. Ever since then, I've never looked at that logo the same. It is definitely unique. And when I found that out, I said, it's pretty cool that they were able to do that. I do appreciate that when you have these little subtleties within a logo. And of course, the Blue Jay one, what I do like about it is the fact that you have the red maple leaf coming up over on the side there. And I do like the fact that the Blue Jays very effectively use the different hues of blue for their Blue Jay. Maybe I've liked since the other Blue Jays swinging the bat and all the rest of it. This is effective. It works well. Sometimes these stylized ones, you can see them better, and they look better, a little bit neater on a uniform than the logos that I really enjoy. And I will do a logo show on that. And believe me, you'd be surprised the logos that are out there, and you say, wow, those are pretty cool. I wish they would go back to them. Talking about the Browns and the Cowboys, as they said in the past. Anyway, here's something I wanted to talk about, and that is I was saying that I was hoping that baseball would have a little bit more tradition. I know that the Reds play opening day at home. In fact, I went all the way back. I just want to give a shout out to two places. Baseball Reference I like to use for the stats, and I also use Baseball Almanac. They have different, let's see how I can say it. Well, they're based on different interests in the stats and the history of the game, but they're both very effective. And if you can coordinate it and use them side by side, it's really effective. But I was thinking about this. Cincinnati Reds have always played opening day at home. Now, I know that in a previous segment, I did kind of make an error. It used to be when I was growing up, the Reds always kicked off opening day. And that's not true anymore, and I really wish they would. Remember that the Reds, Cincinnati would have a big parade, boom, parade going down in the center of Cincinnati, and then they would have half day for the kids, and then they would have the baseball game played at Crosley or Riverfront, wherever. I know that Pete Rose always mentioned how much fun that was opening day in Cincinnati. But the Reds traditionally used to be the opening day team, and then everybody would follow suit, whether it was an hour later or a day later. But the Reds have always been at home, and I did look that up. Probably Baseball Almanac even gave me this. This is the tremendous. The most frequent opponents that the Reds played are the Chicago teams, because it was either the Colts or the Orphans, but they've never played the White Sox, or the Pittsburgh Pirates or St. Louis. In fact, those for many years, I was even looking at this going back to 1900. I could have gone back a little bit farther, but I think for just the sake, I think you get an idea. They either played Pittsburgh or Chicago. And here's an interesting thing about the Cincinnati Reds on opening day. Sometimes they would just meet for one game against the team. I'm thinking about Houston in 1964. Do you realize that they played Houston in 64 for one game, and then they went and played somebody else? That kind of leads me to the other thing I was thinking about, too, with this coronavirus and the 60-game schedule. I was hoping baseball would do even something like this. Have three teams at a neutral site, one of the ballparks in Arizona and stuff. And just have A play B, B play C, and then A play C. That would be another way of doing a doubleheader. You could have all three games be 7 innings. And then the next day, A, B, C, doubleheader. One team obviously would, one team would probably play a 9-inning game, and the other two games would be 7-inning games. But it would be fun. And now you have three teams. I've done that for softball tournaments. A, B, C, A, B, C. Okay. A plays B, B plays C. While B is playing C, A rests and all the rest of it. Okay. So they could have even think about doing something like that. Maybe even experiment with it next year. If we have the same problem. But the Cincinnati Reds have traditionally played at home. And I did make a mistake on this. I knew that they always opened up the season. But I am glad that baseball has kept them traditionally a home team on opening day. At least game one, they're always playing at home. However, over the last few years, maybe they've opened at home, but they've taken away the tradition of the Reds being the official team that opens the season. They've kind of taken that away. Anyway, For the Toronto Blue Jays and Montreal Expos, here's what I discovered. And I wish baseball would do something more in line with this, and that is if it's 4th of July, have all the American teams play in American ballparks. So that means that Toronto's on the road. But on Canada Day, you're only making this for one team. Just have Toronto be the home team every year on Canada Day. And if we ever get another franchise in Montreal, obviously have them. Many times teams travel. And in fact, what I was looking at is their records. Do you know how Toronto, I'm just going to use Toronto first. Toronto, when they play home on Canada Day, they are 13 and 17 when they play home on Canada Day. And this is something, though, that they should fight baseball about. When they're the away team on Canada Day, they've dropped 9 of 11 contests. So it would behoove them to say it's a matter of national pride, tradition, that we, the Toronto Blue Jays, play on Canada Day, always at home. Give us that sense of tradition. On July 4th, when the Blue Jays have been home, they're 16 and 20, or when they've been home, they're 6 and 7, and 16 and 23 overall in their history. Montreal, though, is a little different. Remember now, they've been in, I guess, Washington about 15, 16 years. Montreal, playing on Canada Day at home, is 10 and 12, or was 10 and 12, and on the road was 4 and 9. Again, they should be saying, or they should have said, let us be home for Canada Day, national pride and all the rest of it. Conversely, on July 4th, they're 6 and 5 on July 4th at home. But here's the thing. I had to do this a couple of times, and I know my math isn't the best, but when I did it 2-3 times just to check, I figured, okay, I can go with it. The Expos were 18 and 8 on the road on July 4th. That's a pretty good record. 9 and 4, you're playing over 630 baseball at that point, okay? And not only that, but here is an oddity in the schedule. I remember that there was that one All-Star game played at Comiskey Park, 1983, and that occurred on July 6th. So July 4th was a Sunday that year. The funny thing is, do you know that the Expos played not just a game on July 5th, they played a doubleheader against the Cubs, and I checked it out. It was not a postponement and that they had to get the games in. That was a regularly scheduled double header the day before the All-Star game. Weird. And there have been a couple of times that Montreal and Toronto did meet on the 4th of July and also on Canada Day. Actually, Canada Day. But also there was a couple of times where Toronto did not play on the 4th of July. And I think they should. I think all the teams should. There are just certain things that you should. January 1st, when I was a kid, it was always reserved for college football. Unless it occurred on a Sunday and it was the playoffs and all the rest of it, and then they would bump to January 2nd. But there's just certain days that you would just assume or just should be set aside. And that July 4th should just be baseball, baseball, baseball. Because what's happening now, and I've said this before, baseball is turning into a very specialized sport, a niche sport or niche. It's being really followed by just a certain few. And as I stated, it's really not being followed by the younger generation. And I've gone into the problems with that. Too much primetime games, 8:30 at night, instead of showing the World Series, let's say, during the day, on the weekends at least. But the other thing with it as well is that baseball has become too, how do I say this, too slow for the viewer. And they've done things to kind of aggravate the fans that really follow the game, like certain times not playing on July 4th or playing on July 4th at night. I know sometimes they give them the fireworks and stuff like that. But you know what? Save that for another day. So I wish baseball would, think about that when they do their future schedules. And I know that baseball doesn't throw these into a computer per se, that actually it's done by hand sometimes. And there are many things that come into play. You have to be aware of the number of games that you can play in a row. You have to be aware of, let's say, the management interests and the players' interests, that each team has to have a certain amount of home games over the weekend and a certain amount of games, let's say, on a Friday, etc. I understand all that. But for heaven's sake, it's only one game. I was even thinking this. Many of the opponents that the Blue Jays played on either on Canada Day or the 4th of July was Detroit. Why not just set it up where Toronto plays Detroit on Canada Day and then goes and travels to Detroit and plays them on the 4th of July? It's no big deal. You can even do more tradition that way. Yankees, Red Sox maybe on July 4th all the time, or the Yankees and the Mets all the time on 4th of July. So people don't really necessarily have to travel too far and all the rest of it. So I wish baseball would do something like that. I wanted to show you this, and I was thinking about the All-Star games. And sometimes people wonder, like, where I come up with some of the things I want to talk about. And just one thing hits you with another. And I've always enjoyed the All-Star game. I wish that they would do some. Actually, as I've stated, I was initiated into the All-Star game. I was going to watch with my brother on a Tuesday night. It poured rain in Washington, D.C. This is back in '69, a couple of days after the lunar moon landing with Neil Armstrong. It was played the next day. It was one of the craziest All-Star games. Not so much for the game because the National League prevailed 9-3, but I did fall in love with Johnny Bench that day. He got robbed of a second home run by Yastrzemski making an unbelievable catch over the wall. McCovey had 2 home runs in that game for the National League to propel them to the victory, and he won the MVP. But it was kind of crazy because Denny McLain, who was supposed to start the game, was not there and actually helicoptered in. So he was kind of crazy for the time. McLain is one of those coulda, shoulda, woulda. Had he maybe taken his professional career a little bit more seriously. As it was, Mel Stottlemyre started for the American League. And it was a dreary day in Washington. The funny thing is that rainstorm came up the coast, and that same rain that just bombarded the nation's capital, man, that hit us. It was like an all-day monsoon. But I remember it was one of the most enjoyable days I spent with my brother watching a baseball game and said, man, I'd love to be one. I couldn't believe that this was their full-time job. I always thought they were weekend warriors, carpenters or plumbers during the week, and then they did this on the weekends. Never did I think that they were getting paid to play this game that I loved. And I just thought it was always cool. So 69 always has a very good memory for me, that All-Star game. And, of course, then 70 and 71 followed them with the box scores and everything else. But it got me thinking, and I said, wow, 69, first year that the Expos were in the league. I don't even think they won 60 games. I think they went 55 and 102. No, that would give you. I think they went 55 and 107 that year. They had a terrible team. They drafted maybe aging players and all the rest of it. But I said to myself, wait a minute, 69. Who was the first All-Star for the Montreal Expos? I kind of had a good idea, and I was right when I did finally look it up. And that has a little history. And then, of course, 1977, the Blue Jays, along with the Mariners, come aboard in the American League. And, of course, that leads to who's the first All-Star in Blue Jays history. And it was pretty interesting because I'll let it sink in, and I'll go over the other ones. Then I started thinking, all right, neither player got a hit. And in fact, neither player, no, I shouldn't say that, but the player for the Expos, I always felt sorry for him, even more so. Not only does he make the 69 All-Star team, he makes the 70 team, and he makes the 71 team in that 71 All-Star game. There is one other All-Star game that I think had as many or more future Hall of Famers on the rosters. But that 71, and I'll even talk about that later on when we get deeper into July. That 71 team had 71 All-Star game had so many Hall of Famers. You had Kaline playing, of course, his last All-Star game in Detroit. You had Mays, Aaron, Clemente, and I will get back to Clemente. I promise you, Howard and everybody else, I'll do a special 71 World Series, I promise. Clemente, Bench, Palmer, Seaver, all these guys on these teams. Torrey. Well, Torrey was not technically a player who made the Hall of Fame, but he is in the Hall of Fame as a manager. Probably everything put into one. But not only did this particular Montreal Expo make the 69 team, he makes the 70 team, and he makes the 71 team. And he didn't play in any of the games. I always felt sorry. They didn't even give him a look. Like, how do you go there 3 times? You have Anderson as your manager in 71, Hodges as your manager in 70, and in 69, you have Red Shaney's as your manager. And you're going through the bench, especially 69, and saying, we're winning this 9-3, and you don't give the guy with the brand new uniform from the brand new team, from a brand new country, and say, go out there and play at least defense in the outfield. Well, I will tell you one other clue. He starts it's the only All-Star game he started, I do believe. He started the 76 All-Star game in Philadelphia. And he led the American League in RBIs in 76. And he also made the All-Star team with the Astros way back when. And his name, you know it, Met fans, La Grande Orange, Rusty Staub. First All-Star for the Montreal Expos. And by the way, for the Montreal Expos, the strange thing is they have to go 12 years before they get their first hit by an Expo in an All-Star game. That happened to be Andre Dawson. And they, strangely enough, in that 81 World Series All-Star game, they get their first home run by Gary Carter, who belted 2 in that All-Star game when they come back, ironically, from the strike-shortened season that year to play an abbreviated season with a crazy way for the pennant contenders to get into the playoffs. Now, the American League, the first All-Star for the Blue Jays, was a very good, not great. He was not a Willie Mays 5-tool player. I would say that he could be hitter, be power, probably a C-plus runner, probably a B, maybe a B-plus fielder because he played about 2-3 positions, first base in the outfield, and definitely just a C arm at best. But he did provide enough that he was kind of like a player that you can win with, a winning type of ball player, which is probably why the Expos, the Blue Jays, and the Dodgers all wanted his services. His name was, and he played on the 63 Dodgers, the 65 Dodgers, and the 66 Dodgers. Not bad. He got 2 World Series. All right. Actually had a great series in 65. His name, Ron Fairley, was the first Blue Jay All-Star in their history. And real quick, their first hit was by Damaso Garcia. And I know that you Yankee fans know who he is. Damaso Garcia, their second baseman for the Blue Jays. And actually their first home run was by another second baseman for the Blue Jays. That occurred in 93 at Camden Yards. That was Roberto Alomar. So I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane with all things Canada. Here's my red tie for both Canada and the United States as they celebrate their independence. Actually, this Independence Weekend or Independence Week. This is Will O'Toole for Sports History on PKRG-TV. And remember, you can see more of my cartoons at O'Toone's Cartoons. Thank you very much for joining me. I feel very privileged and honored to be welcomed into your homes. And I look forward to doing it again. Bye now.